Welcome to a story about what happens when we mistake quiet for weakness and age for irrelevance. It is a tale of betrayal, but also one of profound, unshakable strength, a reminder that the most powerful currents are often the ones that run silent and deep. It begins, as so many tragedies do, with a simple, cutting phrase spoken in the echoing chaos of a place designed for departures. "This is for the best, Mom." The words, dropped like stones into a still pond, came from Amanda, her face a mask of strained resolve. She refused to meet her mother's eyes, focusing instead on a distant imaginary point over Eleanor's shoulder. The cavernous Grand Central Terminal roared around them, a symphony of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and the hurried footsteps of 1,000 lives intersecting for a fleeting moment. Yet, in the small frozen bubble of space between mother and daughter, there was only a chilling silence. Eleanor sat perfectly still on the polished wooden bench, her back straight, a lifetime of discipline etched into her posture. Her hands, folded in her lap, were the only things that betrayed a hint of tension, the knuckles white against the worn fabric of her simple wool coat. The coat was old but impeccably clean, a muted gray that seemed to absorb the light around it, rendering her almost invisible in the bustling crowd. Beside her sat a single small suitcase, a travel companion from a bygone era, its leather corners scuffed and softened by journeys Amanda knew nothing about. Amanda, by contrast, was a creature of the modern world. Her clothes were sharp, her movements jerky with a nervous energy she tried to pass off as purpose. She clutched her phone in one hand like a talisman, the source of her power, the instrument of her mother's impending exile. "I've transferred a little money to your account," she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "It should be enough to get you settled somewhere. A small town, maybe. Quieter. You've always said you wanted quiet." Eleanor's gaze finally lifted, and for a second, it held Amanda's. There was no accusation in her eyes, no pleading. There was something far more unnerving, a deep, profound, and utterly unshakable calm. It was the look of a mountain contemplating a storm, ancient and unmoved. "Amanda," she said. Her voice was not frail, as Amanda had convinced herself it was. It was low and clear, carrying a resonance that seemed to momentarily quiet the station's din. It was just one word, but it held the weight of 60 years of motherhood, of lullabies sung in the dark, of fevers cooled with a gentle hand, of a life poured into the vessel of this daughter who now stood ready to shatter it. The disquiet in Amanda's soul intensified. This was not how it was supposed to go. She had expected tears, protests, a scene. She had rehearsed her responses, her justifications, her frustrated sighs. She was prepared for a fight. She was not prepared for this solemn, regal dignity. It made her feel small, petty, a vandal defacing a masterpiece. "The train is boarding," she said, her voice brittle. She thrust a ticket into her mother's hand. It was for a bus, not a train, heading to a town she'd picked at random on a map, a place with no connections, no history, no hope. She didn't give her own ticket. She held that one tight. Her train, the express to her new life, was on a different platform. A life free from the perceived burden of an aging parent. A life she believed she deserved. She leaned in, a clumsy, fleeting kiss on Eleanor's cheek. The skin was cool, smooth. "I love you," she whispered, the greatest lie of all. And then she was gone, swallowed by the river of people, her bright red jacket a final, fleeting flare of color before she vanished. Eleanor did not watch her go. She stared straight ahead, her eyes fixed on the great clock in the center of the terminal. Tick, tock. Each second a hammer blow, sealing the moment in time. She felt the cold of the bench seep into her bones, a stark contrast to the burning humiliation coiling in her gut. She did not cry. She did not rail against her fate. She simply sat, a statue of silent endurance in a sea of motion. The train whistle blew, a mournful cry that echoed the hollowness spreading through her chest. It was the sound of departure, the sound of being left behind. She remained on that bench long after the last echo faded, the worthless bus ticket still clutched in her hand, her expression unreadable. No one knew the truth of her past. No one knew the strength she held in reserve. No one asked. And in that moment, surrounded by a million strangers, no one cared. The world had dismissed her as a forgotten old woman, a relic left on a station bench. The world had no idea what it had just done. The first wall she hit was not one of despair, but of simple, cold commerce. An hour had passed, perhaps two. The relentless ticking of the great station clock was the only measure of time in the suspended reality Eleanor now inhabited. The initial shock, a sharp, piercing icicle to the heart, had receded, leaving behind a profound and unnerving clarity. The chill from the bench had become a part of her, a deep, internal cold that demanded warmth. She saw a small, brightly lit coffee shop tucked into an alcove, a beacon of steam and light against the station's cavernous gray. The smell of roasted coffee beans and burnt sugar was an invitation, a promise of a small comfort in a world that had suddenly become hostile. With slow, deliberate movements, as if her limbs were unaccustomed to the act of rising, she stood. Her back remained ramrod straight, her head unbowed. She picked up her small, scuffed suitcase, its weight familiar and grounding in her hand, and walked towards the light. The line was short. A young barista with tired eyes and a bored expression took her order. "Just a black coffee, please." Large. Her voice, still clear and steady, caused the young man to look up, surprised. He had expected a whisper, a quaver. He saw only calm, steady eyes. Eleanor reached into her handbag, a simple, elegant leather purse that, like her coat, had seen better decades. It was worn, but the clasp still clicked shut with a satisfying snap. She produced a debit card, one Amanda had insisted she use, linked to the joint account that held her modest pension. She slid it into the chip reader. The machine beeped, a shrill, unpleasant sound. On the small screen, red letters flashed with brutal finality. Declined. The barista sighed, a puff of weary impatience. "It didn't go through, ma'am." Eleanor felt a flicker of confusion, but no panic. Mistakes happened. "Try it again, please," she said, her tone even. He ran it again. The same shrill beep, the same red letters. Declined. Behind her, a man in a business suit cleared his throat audibly. Eleanor did not turn. She simply reached into her purse again and produced a different card, a credit card she kept for emergencies. "Let's try this one." The barista swiped it. The machine whirred for a moment before delivering its verdict with another robotic cry. Insufficient funds. Now, the cold deepened. This was no mistake. This was deliberate. This was a scorched earth policy. Amanda had not just left her. She had stripped her bare, severing every financial tie with the cold precision of an executioner. The businessman behind her muttered, "Come on, lady, some of us have trains to catch." Eleanor pulled the card from the barista's hand. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "My apologies," she said, her voice betraying nothing. She turned and walked away from the counter, leaving the warmth and the light behind, stepping back into the indifferent gloom of the main hall. She found her bench again. It felt like returning to a crime scene. She sat and pulled out her phone. She tried to open her banking app, the one she rarely used but knew was there. A new message popped up. "Your online access has been suspended for security reasons. Please contact your branch." She tried to make a call. The screen flashed. No service. Amanda had not missed a single detail. The account, the cards, the phone plan, all of it gone. All of it severed. She was utterly, completely alone and disconnected, a ghost in the machine of modern life. The full weight of her daughter's betrayal settled upon her, not as a storm of grief, but as a heavy, suffocating blanket. Amanda had not just abandoned her mother, she had attempted to erase her. She had tried to render her powerless, voiceless, and penniless, a non-person in a world that ran on data and digits. As dusk began to bleed through the high, grimy windows of the station, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor, Eleanor placed the phone back in her purse. She did not slump. She did not weep. She sat and watched the crowds thin, her face a mask of serene contemplation. A security guard eyed her with suspicion, his gaze lingering on the worn suitcase. To him, she was just another piece of human refuse, another problem to be dealt with before morning. He saw a frail, destitute old woman. He did not see the slow-burning fire of resolve being kindled in the depths of her soul. He did not see the architect of empires, the silent partner in deals that shaped skylines, the woman who had once moved markets with a single, whispered word. He saw what Amanda wanted him to see, and in that moment, Eleanor Vance made a silent vow. They would all see. Soon, they would all see. Miles away, on a high-speed train slicing through the darkening countryside, Amanda Vance felt a surge of what she desperately wanted to believe was freedom. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the track was a mantra of her new life. Free, free, free. She had done it. She had finally cut the cord. She stared out the window at the blurred landscape, a smug smile playing on her lips. She had been meticulous, flawlessly executing the plan she had spent months devising. Every account, every card, every digital footprint connecting her to her mother had been firewalled or deleted. She pictured her mother, sitting on that bench, a pathetic, helpless figure. A pang of something that felt dangerously like guilt pricked at her, but she swatted it away like a persistent fly. It was necessary. It was for the best. Her mother had become a drain, a constant, low-level hum of need that was holding her back. In Amanda's mind, Eleanor was a woman of a bygone era, someone who didn't understand the modern world, someone whose simple life of routine and quiet was a cage Amanda refused to be trapped in. She had her own life to live, her own ambitions. She was a junior marketing executive at a rapidly growing tech firm, and the pressure was immense. She needed to be sharp, focused, unencumbered. An aging mother, with her predictable worries and her refusal to embrace new technology, was an anchor. Amanda pulled out her laptop, the sleek silver surface a reflection of her own self-image. She logged into her bank account, the main one, the one from which she had systematically siphoned every last cent of her mother's pension and savings over the past year, justifying it as repayment for a childhood she had rewritten in her mind as one of emotional neglect. She saw the balance, a healthy six-figure number that was now, finally, all hers. A deep satisfaction washed over her. She checked the joint account she had shared with Eleanor. Balance, $0.00. Account status, pending closure. She checked the credit card activity. Last attempt, a coffee shop in Grand Central. Result, declined. She allowed herself a small, cruel smile. It was working perfectly. Her mother was now a ghost, financially speaking, a non-entity. What would she do? Amanda mused. Probably find a shelter. Eventually. Some charity would take her in. That's what happened to people like her. People who couldn't keep up. The thought was callous, and a part of her, a small, frightened, childlike voice deep inside, screamed in protest. But the ambitious, ruthless adult she had become silenced it. This was survival of the fittest. This was the way of the world. She had to be strong. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her boss. Big presentation tomorrow. The Vanguard account. Be ready. The Vanguard account was the biggest deal of her career. Landing it would mean a promotion, a huge bonus, a corner office. It was everything she wanted, the validation she craved. All her focus shifted to the presentation. She opened the files, the slick logos and aggressive marketing copy filling the screen. Her mother, the station, the betrayal, it all faded into the background, a necessary but unpleasant chore that was now complete. She worked for hours, fueled by ambition and expensive bottled water, the train carrying her further and further away from the woman who had given her life. She was so engrossed in her own ascent that she failed to notice a small, almost insignificant detail in the corporate brief. The Vanguard Group was a massive old money investment firm, a quiet behemoth, and its reclusive, enigmatic founder, the one who had started it all with a small inheritance and an almost supernatural understanding of market forces 50 years ago, was a woman. A woman who had long since retired from public life, handing the reins to a trusted board but retaining a silent, controlling interest. A woman whose name was rarely spoken in the press, but was whispered with reverence in the highest echelons of finance. A name Amanda had never bothered to learn. A name that was, at that very moment, being entered into a security log by a night watchman at a corporate skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, Eleanor Vance. The first rays of dawn cast a sickly orange glow over the city, a city that had offered Eleanor no comfort and no shelter. She had spent the night in the 24-hour waiting area of the bus terminal, a place even more transient and desolate than the train station. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. She had not slept. Instead, she had sat on a hard plastic chair, her small suitcase at her feet, and she had thought. She did not dwell on Amanda's betrayal. To do so would be to drown in an ocean of pain. Instead, she focused, her mind, a tool she had not used to its full capacity in years, beginning to whir and click like the tumblers of a complex lock. The plan that had formed was simple, audacious, and relied on a single, unchangeable fact that Amanda, in her arrogant ignorance, had overlooked. You can steal a person's money, but you cannot steal their name. And Eleanor Vance's name was a key. At precisely 8 a.m., she left the bus terminal and walked. She moved with a purpose that turned heads, an old woman in a plain gray coat striding through the morning rush hour like a ship cutting through waves. Her destination was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, the headquarters of a prestigious old-world bank, Sterling and Trust. This was not the bank where her pension had been held. This was a different beast entirely. This was old money, a place of hushed tones and deep-rooted power. She walked through the revolving doors, her worn shoes silent on the marble floor. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, vast and intimidating. A young woman at a polished mahogany desk looked up, her expression a carefully curated blend of politeness and condescension. "May I help you?" she asked, her eyes flicking over Eleanor's simple coat. "I need to speak with the branch manager," Eleanor said. "Mr. Davies." Her voice was quiet but carried the effortless authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The receptionist's eyebrow twitched. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Eleanor replied. "He will see me." The sheer, unadulterated confidence in that statement gave the young woman pause. She hesitated, then picked up her phone. A moment later, a man in his late 20s with slicked back hair and a suit that was a little too tight emerged from an office. This was Mark Davies, a man whose ambition far outstripped his experience. He saw Eleanor and his face tightened in annoyance. "Yes?" "I'm very busy," he said, not bothering to hide his irritation. He saw an indigent old woman who had somehow wandered into his pristine lobby. "I need to access a holding account," Eleanor stated, her gaze level. "The name is Vance. Eleanor Vance." Davies scoffed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Ma'am, this is Sterling and Trust. We don't handle small-time checking accounts. Perhaps the community bank down the street would be more your speed." He gestured dismissively toward the door. "Now, if you don't mind, I have important clients to attend to." The condescension was a physical thing, an oily film that coated his words. He turned to the security guard standing near the entrance. "Frank, could you please escort this woman out?" Eleanor did not move. The fire in her soul, which had been a slow burn, now blazed. "Young man," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet slicing through the lobby's quiet hum. "I suggest you go to your computer, access your institution's primary holding registry, and look up that name again. Look for the Vanguard Trust, the founding signatory." Davies froze. The name Vanguard was a legend in the financial world. It was a massive, multi-billion-dollar entity, and it was rumored that Sterling and Trust was its primary private repository. But the idea that this woman was connected to it was ludicrous. It was the ramblings of a senile old lady. He laughed. It was a genuine, mocking laugh. "Grandma, I think you've been watching too many movies. Frank, now." The security guard, a burly man named Frank, took a step forward, his expression apologetic but firm. "Ma'am, you heard him. You have to leave." Eleanor looked at the guard, then back at the smug face of Mark Davies. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well," she said softly. She turned, but not toward the exit. She walked over to a small, ornate writing desk in the corner of the lobby. She picked up a pen and a piece of the bank's thick, cream-colored letterhead. With a steady hand, she wrote a single sentence and signed her name with a flourish that was both elegant and powerful. She folded the note, walked back to the security guard, and held it out to him. "See that this gets to the CEO's office. The name is Harrison. Tell him Eleanor is waiting." Frank looked at the note, then at Davies, who just rolled his eyes and waved his hand in a shooing motion. With a sigh, the guard took the piece of paper. He had no intention of delivering it. He would throw it in the trash as soon as she was gone. He put his hand gently on her elbow. "This way, ma'am." He led a silent, dignified Eleanor Vance out of the bank and into the cold morning air, her public humiliation complete. Eleanor did not wander far. She crossed the wide, sun-drenched plaza in front of the bank and sat on a cold stone bench directly opposite the towering glass entrance of Sterling and Trust. From this vantage point, she could see everyone who came and went. She placed her small suitcase beside her, smoothed the front of her coat, and folded her hands in her lap. And then, she waited. She was a study in patience, a sentinel of stillness in the heart of the city's frantic energy. Passers-by barely glanced at her, another fixture of the urban landscape, as unremarkable as a pigeon or a discarded newspaper. They could not see the strategic mind at work behind her calm facade. They did not know she had just lit a fuse and was now calmly waiting for the explosion. Her plan was a gamble, but a calculated one. It depended on two things: the lingering loyalty of an old friend and the sclerotic, protocol-bound nature of a large corporation. The security guard, Frank, had taken the note. He might intend to throw it away, but he was a man in a uniform, a cog in a machine. The note was on official bank letterhead. It had a name on it: Harrison, CEO. The risk of not passing it along, however small, was greater than the risk of doing so. Corporate paranoia was a powerful force. Eleanor was betting on that paranoia. She was betting that Frank, after a moment's thought, would cover himself by passing the note to his supervisor, who would pass it to his, and so on, a small, insignificant piece of paper climbing the chain of command, propelled by a mixture of curiosity and fear. Inside the bank, Mark Davies had already forgotten about her, immersed in the numbers on his screen, dreaming of his next promotion. He was feeling particularly pleased with himself for having so efficiently dispatched the morning's nuisance. He was a gatekeeper of wealth, and he had done his job. An hour passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Eleanor did not move. She did not eat or drink. Her focus was absolute, her resolve a tangible force. She had faced down corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, and market crashes. She had built an empire from dust and ashes after her husband's death, a man who had taken all the public credit for her quiet genius. She had endured the condescension of men like Mark Davies her entire life. This was nothing new. This was just another boardroom, albeit one made of concrete and cold air. Then, she made her second move. She stood, walked to a public payphone on the corner, a relic of the past that most people didn't even notice anymore, and used the last few coins she had scrounged from the bottom of her purse. She dialed a number she knew by heart, a private line that bypassed secretaries and assistants. It rang twice. A deep, familiar voice answered. Harrison. Arthur, Eleanor said, her voice as calm as a summer lake. It's me. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, an explosion of noise. Eleanor? My God, where are you? We've been trying to reach you for days. Your daughter said you were unreachable, on a retreat. Arthur Harrison was her lawyer, her confidant, the executor of her vast and complex estate, and one of the few people on earth who knew the true extent of her wealth and influence. He was the CEO of the Sterling and Trust Holding Company. I am sitting on a bench opposite your bank's main branch, Eleanor said, her tone devoid of emotion. I was just denied service and escorted out by a young man named Mark Davies. The silence on the other end of the line was now heavy, dangerous. He did what? Harrison's voice was a low growl. Arthur, Eleanor said, cutting him off. I don't want him fired. Not yet. I want you to arrange a full board meeting. The Vanguard Trust. I am calling in my signatory rights. I want to liquidate a position, a significant one, and I want the meeting to happen in that branch, in Mr. Davies's office, in 1 hour. Eleanor, that's unprecedented. It will cause chaos. Yes, she said. I'm counting on it. 1 hour, Arthur. She hung up the phone, the decisive click echoing in the small enclosure. She walked back to her bench, sat down, and resumed her vigil. The fuse was not just lit. The rocket was now in the air. All she had to do was wait for it to land. The initial ripple from Eleanor's call was imperceptible, a silent tremor deep within the corporate bedrock of Sterling and Trust, but it spread with the terrifying speed of a shockwave. On the 50th floor, Arthur Harrison slammed down his phone, his face a thunderous mask. His secretary, a woman who had worked for him for 20 years and had never seen him so much as raise his voice, flinched. Get me the board, he snarled. All of them. Emergency summons, and get me the profile on a branch manager, Mark Davies, now. Within minutes, the machinery of power began to grind into motion. Phones rang in opulent offices across the city. Schedules were violently cleared. Confused, powerful men and women were told to drop everything and convene at a location that made no sense, a retail branch downtown. The reason given was a single, cryptic phrase, Code Phi. Code Phi was a protocol that had never been used. It was a theoretical contingency, a doomsday clause in the company's charter that could only be invoked by one person on Earth, the founding signatory of the Vanguard Trust. It signified a direct, unassailable order from the ultimate source of the bank's power. It was the financial equivalent of a royal command. Down in the marble lobby, Mark Davies was having an excellent day. He had just placated a wealthy and demanding client, his charm working its magic. He was leaning back in his expensive chair sipping an espresso when his personal line buzzed. It was the regional director. Mark. The director's voice was tight with stress. What the hell is going on down there? Did you have an incident this morning? Davies sat up straight, his mind racing. An incident? No, sir. Smooth sailing. Think, Mark. Anyone unusual? Anyone you had to remove? The memory of the old woman surfaced. Davies laughed nervously. Oh, that. Just some senile lady, sir. Causing a bit of a disturbance. Claimed she was… well, you're not going to believe this. She claimed she was connected to Vanguard. The line went dead silent. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the server room. Then the director's voice came back, and all the feigned collegiality was gone. It was flat, cold, and filled with a terror that Davies had never heard before. Mark, you are to stay in your office. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch anything. A helicopter is landing on the roof in 10 minutes with the CEO and the entire board. Your branch is about to become the center of the universe. And pray, Mark. Pray to God that you did not just insult the woman who owns it. The phone clicked dead. Mark Davies sat frozen, the espresso cup trembling in his hand. The color drained from his face. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A joke. A prank. But the raw fear in his director's voice was no joke. He lurched to his computer, his hands shaking so badly he could barely type. He pulled up the internal registry, the one he had been too arrogant to check before. He typed in the name. Vance. Eleanor. The screen flickered. And then the profile appeared. It was mostly classified, sealed at the highest level. But one line was visible. One line that made the air leave his lungs in a silent scream. Founding signatory. Trust. Vanguard. Asset valuation. Undisclosed. 9 zeros was the minimum for that classification. 9 zeros. Billionaire. A wave of nausea washed over him. The old woman. The worn coat. The quiet voice. The note. Oh God, the note. He had told Frank to throw it away. He scrambled for his intercom. Frank! Frank, that note. The note the old woman gave you. Do you still have it? Frank's voice crackled back, hesitant. Yeah, boss. I felt weird throwing it out. I gave it to my supervisor. He said he'd send it up the chain, just in case. Mark Davies collapsed back into his chair, a low moan escaping his lips. It was too late. The note was already in the system. The chain of events was already in motion. Outside, the first black town car, sleek and silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. Then another, and another. Men in dark suits with earpieces emerged, their eyes scanning the plaza. They moved with quiet, lethal efficiency, establishing a perimeter. The regular customers of Sterling and Trust found their way barred by polite but immovable men. The gears of a world Mark Davies had only ever read about were now turning, and he was caught in the middle, about to be ground into dust. And across the plaza, on a simple stone bench, an old woman in a gray coat sat, watching it all unfold, her expression as serene and unforgiving as a winter sky. The storm had arrived. The climax was not a whirlwind of shouting and chaos, but a moment of terrible, deafening silence. Mark Davies's office, normally his personal kingdom of smug self-satisfaction, had been transformed into a holding cell. The air was thick with the scent of fear. His fear. For the past hour he had watched through his glass walls as his branch was systematically taken over. Stern-faced men and women, titans of finance whose faces he recognized from the covers of magazines, had filed into his largest conference room. They did not speak to him. They did not even look at him. He was already a ghost. The final arrival was Arthur Harrison. He was a tall man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to see right through steel and bone. He walked directly to Davies's office, the security guard Frank trailing nervously behind him. Harrison didn't knock. He just opened the door and stepped inside, his presence sucking all the oxygen from the room. "You are Mark Davies," Harrison stated. It wasn't a question. Davies could only nod. his throat too tight to form words. Harrison's gaze was like a physical weight. "Frank," he said, turning to the guard. "Where is she?" "She's still on the bench across the plaza, sir," Frank stammered. "She hasn't moved." Harrison's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Go to her," he said, his voice now quiet, gentle, filled with a reverence that stunned Davies. "Tell her that Arthur is here and escort her in. Use the main entrance, and you will address her as Mrs. Vance." As Frank hurried to obey, Harrison turned his glacial attention back to Davies. "I have one question for you, son. Why?" Davies finally found his voice, a pathetic squeaking thing. I I didn't know. She she looked She looked what?" Harrison's voice was dangerously low. "Old? Poor? Unimportant? You judged the book by its cover, Mr. Davies. But you didn't just misjudge a book. You defaced a national treasure." At that moment, the doors to the bank glided open. All activity in the lobby ceased. Every head turned. There, framed by the entrance, stood Eleanor Vance, flanked by the security guard Frank, who held the door for her as if she were visiting royalty. She walked in, her posture erect, her expression unchanged. The worn gray coat seemed to hang on her differently now, like the simple robes of an empress. The scuffed suitcase, which Frank carried for her, looked less like luggage and more like a chest containing state secrets. She walked across the marble floor, her footsteps echoing in the tomb-like silence. She did not look at the stunned faces of the board members who now peered out from the conference room. She did not look at the terrified receptionist. She walked directly to Mark Davies's office and stopped at the door, her eyes meeting his. In her gaze, there was no triumph, no anger, no gloating. There was only a vast, profound disappointment that was 1,000 times more devastating than any rage. Davies felt his entire world, his ambition, his carefully constructed sense of self-worth, crumble into dust. Arthur Harrison stepped forward. "Eleanor," he said softly, "the board is assembled." "Thank you, Arthur," she replied. Then she looked at Davies, who was visibly trembling. "Mr. Davies," she said, and her voice, though quiet, resonated through the entire building. "You were concerned about my funds. I am here to make a withdrawal." She turned and walked toward the conference room. Harrison paused and looked back at the shattered young man. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "the woman you just called Grandma and had thrown out of your bank is Eleanor Vance. She didn't just have an account here. She founded the Vanguard Trust in 1971. That trust, through various holding companies, holds a 48% stake in Sterling and Trust. She is, for all intents and purposes, your boss. The meeting she has just called is to liquidate a small portion of her assets, about $900 million. She is concerned about the leadership and culture of this institution, and frankly, so am I. Your career here is over. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to discuss." He turned and followed Eleanor into the conference room, the door clicking shut behind them, leaving Mark Davies alone in the glass cage of his own making, a monument to the catastrophic failure of judging a person by their appearance. The reveal was complete. The silence that followed was the sound of a universe righting itself. The aftermath was swift and decisive. While the emergency board meeting was underway, news of the incident at the downtown branch of Sterling and Trust began to ripple through the financial world. It started as a whisper, a rumor of a Code 5 event, and quickly escalated into a full-blown earthquake. The bank's stock, which had been stable for years, began to tremble. Traders, sensing blood in the water, started selling. They didn't know the specifics, only that the reclusive, near-mythical founder of Vanguard had personally intervened, and that could only mean one thing: instability. Amanda Vance was in the final stages of preparing for her big presentation. She was in her hotel room, a sleek, impersonal space that reflected her own aspirations. She was running through her slides, her voice confident, her arguments sharp. The Vanguard account was within her grasp. She could feel it. Her phone buzzed with a notification from a financial news app. Sterling and Trust S&T stock plummets on rumors of board shakeup. She frowned. Her company had significant holdings with S&T. This was a concern. Another notification popped up. Source confirms Code V, invoked by Vanguard founder at S&T branch. Vanguard. The name of her prize. A cold knot of anxiety began to form in her stomach. What was happening? She opened her laptop and frantically began searching for news. Articles were sparse, filled with speculation, but one detail kept recurring. The incident had been triggered by a conflict involving the founder at a specific branch location. Her phone rang. It was her boss, his voice frantic. "Amanda, the Vanguard deal is off. They're pulling back, re-evaluating all their third-party contracts. Something huge is going down. I think we just lost the biggest account of the decade." The words hit Amanda like a physical blow. What? Why? I don't know. They said a fundamental reassessment of partnerships based on a recent failure of core values. It makes no sense. Just stay put. I'll call you when I know more. Amanda hung up, her mind reeling. Her triumph, her promotion, her new life. It was all evaporating before her eyes. It was then that a final, terrifying article appeared on her screen, this one from a more reputable source with confirmed details. The headline was a dagger to her heart. Reclusive billionaire Eleanor Vance emerges to shake up Sterling and Trust. After being mistaken for indigent and refused service. The name, Eleanor Vance, her mother's name. It couldn't be. It was a common name, a coincidence. But the article included a grainy cell phone picture, taken by a bystander outside the bank. It showed an old woman in a simple gray coat, her back ramrod straight, being escorted into the bank by a team of security. The world tilted on its axis. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. The woman she had left on a cold station bench. The woman she had stripped of everything. The woman she had dismissed as a weak, helpless, irrelevant relic, was one of the most powerful and respected figures in modern finance. The foundation of her entire life, the wealth she had always taken for granted, the money she had just stolen, it hadn't come from her father's modest successes. It had all come from her, from Eleanor. The quiet, unassuming mother who never spoke of business, who preferred gardening to galas, was the architect of it all. The humiliation was absolute. The shame was a physical fire that consumed her. She had not just abandoned her mother, she had betrayed an empress. Back in New York, the board meeting concluded. Eleanor had not liquidated her holdings. That was never the point. She had simply demonstrated that she could. She had reasserted her authority, not with anger, but with a quiet, unshakable display of power. She had secured a promise from a humbled board to overhaul their training, their culture, and their values from the top down. Arthur Harrison escorted her out of the conference room. Mark Davies was gone, having been allowed to quietly resign in utter disgrace. Eleanor paused in the lobby, now bustling with reporters held back by security. She paid them no mind. Her gaze fell on Frank, the guard, who stood nervously by the door. She walked over to him. "Thank you, Frank," she said softly. "You showed kindness when you didn't have to." She reached into her purse and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. "My foundation offers educational grants. If you or your family ever have need, you call this number directly." Frank took the card, his eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. Eleanor then turned to Arthur. "There is one more thing," she said. "My daughter, Amanda. She has made some errors in judgment. She will find her accounts are now frozen. The assets she misappropriated will be returned to my charitable trust. She will be left with exactly $1,000, enough for a bus ticket home. And a lesson. There was no malice in her voice, only a sad, resolute finality. This was not revenge. It was a reset. It was a painful but necessary rebalancing of the scales. Eleanor Vance, in her simple gray coat, walked out of the bank she owned, her dignity and power fully restored, leaving the wreckage of two arrogant lives in her wake. She was not a victim. She was the storm. So now I ask you, have you ever misjudged someone based on what you saw on the surface? Share your story in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more tales that remind us to look deeper.